When you were just getting started, what were some of those biggest challenges that you faced?
Yeah, I think like all marketplaces, we had to solve the chicken and the egg problem. So for us, we built, a prototype, like an early version of the marketplace, and people could list, they could message, they could buy, and through the marketplace, although that got a lot better over time. The But to solve the initial chicken and the egg problem, what we did is we were pretty well connected in certain sports. And so, having played college lacrosse, we basically went to our buddies who had just graduated from top programs and knew that that was highly desirable inventory. And so we basically used that to seed the marketplace. So we launched with like a dozen or so recently graduated college athletes from top programs, each listing like 10 to 20 items in their locker. And so that seeded with like initial set of supply. Then we took that inventory, and there was a lot of the buying and selling was happening on Facebook groups and forums at the time. And so we would take those listings and basically go post them into the Facebook groups and forums where there was some existing demand. And we were kind of acting as the seller. So a little bit of catfishing of acting like these top college athletes, saying like, "Hey, I'm selling my Maryland lacrosse gear on SidelineSwap," and we would kind of basically have that chat on the forum and then pull them over to the marketplace. What happened was as we started to pull in some of those really, the people that were buying and selling on forums were dealing with a really high level of friction in order to get access to the inventory that they were interested in. So we felt like we could get them into a more frictionless marketplace experience. We could really expand the pool of even that initial group of buyers and sellers. So we'd bring the buyers over. Usually they're like high school athletes who were like following those college teams. And they would say, like, "Oh, wow, this is where all the college players are selling their stuff." So the product then converted them from buyer to seller. And so a dozen or so sellers turned into hundreds and then thousands kind of over the course of the first summer, listing tens of thousands of items. And the way we always thought about that was there's a huge pool of demand for high quality used sports equipment. I think people are always looking for a good deal and are open to shopping used. There's a lot smaller group of people who are thinking explicitly about selling. So our marketing strategy is typically, as we've scaled, stayed consistent with, let's go find people who would be interested in this as a buyer. And then once they get to the product, start converting them to seller. And so once you make a purchase and you go through the chat, you're like, "Wow, this is pretty easy. My item came quickly. Maybe I should try this too. I have a lot of gear in my garage that I could sell." So that was kind of how we got things going. And then over time, we evolved from, we went from really focusing on one sport, which was lacrosse, because that's where we had the connections but I think the concentration on one sport initially was important. If we had tried to build a marketplace for all sports on day one and had, a couple hundred items spread out across every sport, you might come in and shop for hockey gear and see three items and be like, "Oh, this isn't a good marketplace." But we concentrated our efforts on supply and demand in a single category or neat like subcategory. So that way, when, it was always set up to be a sports marketplace, and there was taxonomy set up for some of these other categories. But if you came in, initially, we knew we were driving like 90+% buyers and sellers into a single category, which created a high level of liquidity for within that niche. And then as we got momentum going there and got that flywheel going, we went into and basically replayed the playbook in hockey and then baseball, golf, lacrosse, or golf, skiing, snowboarding. And we've continued to expand out. And now we have like a ton of inventory across all sporting goods categories. But it was a similar playbook. In some cases, we stayed with like the college athletes. In other cases, we found power sellers who had aggregated high quality inventory and were still selling on Facebook or forums. But in almost all cases, we tried to find unique inventory. We weren't just moving inventory from eBay to Sideline. We felt like that wasn't a differentiator. And when we've tested that, it hasn't performed well. It's always been like, how do we go unlock inventory that otherwise isn't being sold and discoverable online, bring it into a marketplace experience, drive buyers to it, and then unlock more supply from peer-to-peer as we go. And we could explain how that's kind of evolved from peer-to-peer to, eventually we did find more of those aggregators across other sports. And then more recently, we've we'll get into our trade initiative where we do some of that aggregation ourselves. But, again, it's always the same playbook of how do we build a good experience of high quality inventory from day one so we could drive buyers into that and then convert those buyers into sellers.